Greetings and welcome to our TeleSeminar today. My name is Caroline Staten. I'm with Transition US, and the event today is sponsored by Transition US. It's the national hub of the Transition Network, which is now in 50 countries around the world. And you can find more information about the transition movement at transitionus.org. And I just wanted to mention a few things before we get started. Our principal aim at Transition US is to provide practical support to the leaders of transition initiatives, those who are considering starting one in their communities, and community leaders who are working on resilience building within their communities. And we would ask that if you can contribute or pay back in some way, that would be tremendous. And here are some possibilities for you. Do something in your community to build your community resilience. There's a lot of different things that you can do in that respect. We also have a number of volunteer needs, and ask that you consider, if you have expertise in any of the areas that we have needs in, that you provide some support in that way. Or if you are able to contribute financially to support us in offering free teleseminars like this, we ask that you do go to our website at transitionus.org and contribute in that way. So please take this seriously and really consider what you can do to help build resilience in the U.S. So the title of this teleseminar is Person Power and the Roadmap to Nonviolent Action. And in this teleseminar, we'll go into the connection between person power, constructive program, and nonviolent resistance. Those are the three phases of the roadmap. And we'll begin with the real beginning. How can each of us empower her or himself through spiritual disciplines like meditation and the use of mantram, along with other tools for realizing our highest potential as spiritual warriors? So we'll hear all about that today and get a lot of different tools and resources that we can further research. So our speakers today are Michael Nagler. He's Professor Emeritus of Classics and Comparative Literature, UC Berkeley, where he co-founded the Peace and Conflict Studies program, in which he taught the immensely popular Nonviolence course that was webcast in its entirety, and also a sophomore seminar called Why Are We Here? Great Writing on the Meaning of Life. And he did that for 15 years. He's received a number of awards and is the author of the Nonviolence Handbook. We'll hear more about that. A Guide to Practical Action, as well as The Search for a Nonviolent Future. And a lot of his work has been translated into a number of different languages: Korean, Arabic, Italian, and many others. He's also has a publication, Our Spiritual Crises, Recovering Human Wisdom in a Time of Violence. And the Upanishads is another book he's worked on, and he's written many articles on peace and spirituality. So there's more information about him on our website as well in terms of this event for today. And the other presenter today is Stephanie Van Hook. She's been working with the Metta Center since 2007 and has been their executive director since 2010. She hosts Peace Paradigm Radio every other Friday. And in her spare time, she's a Montessori educator at the Red Barn Montessori in Petaluma, California. And she's associated with the Green Shadow Cabinet, Peace Workers, and the U.S. Peace Corps. She also wrote a column on Gandhi's wisdom for our times for every day of the year. So those are our presenters today, and so glad that you're able to join us. And we'll hear first from Stephanie, and then we'll hear from Michael, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So Stephanie, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, and it's really wonderful to be on the call with all of our friends in Transition US, because as a Montessori educator in early childhood education, one thing that I learned in our microcosm of our classroom is that the most difficult times of the day are the most challenging, are the times of transition, whether it be from morning circle into work. That transition period is what we're really working with the children, these 3 to 6-year-olds, to have the skills that they're able to go through that transition gracefully, to get to the next place together and to be able to focus and concentrate. And that's just the microcosm, and that can be applied then to the big great turning or the great transition that the world is going through. So we've been excited about transition towns for a long time. And I first of all just want to introduce the Metta Center for Nonviolence. We have a beautiful website at www.MetaCenter, that's METTACENTER.org. So it's not meta with one T, but it's meta with 2 T's, as in friendship, nonviolence, loving kindness. And we have really great resources and support for the journey, for the transition. So I just wanted to list off a few of the things that the Metta Center is working on right now to help people use nonviolence more safely and more effectively, and to understand that nonviolence is something that we can learn and cultivate and practice every day. So we have a magazine called Nonviolence Magazine, and we have Peace Paradigm Radio, our radio show every other Friday on KWMR. We have some books such as the Nonviolence Handbook and Search for a Nonviolent Future, in particular with the emphasis on nonviolence. And I'm also working on a children's book on the values of nonviolence that would help children in early childhood to understand what Gandhi was working on. We have a certificate course in nonviolence studies, and that's online. We have a lot of introductory materials and self-study materials to learn, Nonviolence 101. There's lots of support so any questions that anybody has after this call or until they get into the materials, we work with everybody. And one of my favorite things that the Metta Center promotes is the work of peace teams and unarmed civilian peacekeeping, which is, I always find it's really important to mention this everywhere that we go, because people don't realize that there are such things as unarmed peacekeepers and people forming teams out there of them. So I just wanted to plant that seed in this fertile soil of satyagrahis. And before let's see, we want to cover on this call as well as what has already been mentioned, just again to review, our understanding of what is called person power and how this feeds into a more general theory of nonviolence, which is really most of our presentation, because there's a lot of ideas that people hold about nonviolence that we really like to kind of begin to break apart and analyze and look at together, and it always leads to a very rich conversation and new learning for everybody involved, including us. The roadmap system and how to use it, and then we want to talk about a possible strategic action plan as an example for how to use the roadmap. But before I introduce now Michael, I just wanted to kind of bring us into a quiet space. And this is a passage from the Rig Veda, and it's out of the book God Makes the Rivers to Flow, which is a collection, an anthology of the world's great mystics and mystical writings. And it's called United in Heart. May we be united in heart. May we be united in speech. May we be united in mind. May we perform our duties as did the wise of old. May we be united in our prayer. May we be united in our goal. May we be united in our resolve. May we be united in our understanding. May we be united in our offering. May we be united in our feelings. May we be united in our hearts. May we be united in our thoughts. May there be perfect unity among us. And this is what Gandhi would call heart unity. So it's a unity at the heart level, and on the surface there's all of that beautiful diversity of which makes us so human. So I want to pass it now to Michael Negler. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline, and thank you, Stephanie. And I want to thank everyone who has joined the call, and I want to thank Melissa Momertz for having the idea to set this up. I'm really happy to be speaking with you because I feel that nonviolence is often a kind of missing ingredient in our quiet revolutions or evolutions as we go forward. Some years ago, I was at a Bioneers conference, and I was sitting in the audience listening to friends of mine like Bill McKibben and others, and thinking, whoa, do these people really need nonviolence? They could do so much good for them. So I proposed to do a presentation for them on nonviolence, and that wasn't accepted. So you people are the beneficiaries of all my pent-up frustration. So I hope that you're looking at the presentation. We should be on the first slide, which is just the cover slide showing the Metta Center for Nonviolence and our other motto, our other mission statement. Stephanie already mentioned one, which is the helping people practice nonviolence more safely and more effectively, and the other one that you see on the slide there is promoting nonviolence worldwide. So the first thing is to talk about person power, and a little bit of a background here. In the mid-1980s, there was an uprising in the Philippines, which was successful in the sense that it succeeded in deposing a, quote, president, unquote, who had held on to power and was being very dictatorial. He was assassinating people. In fact, the woman who became president after him, her husband had been assassinated by Ferdinand Marcos, and that was called the People Power Revolution because it pitted the power of people united against the authoritarian power structure. And at Metta, we were working with that a great deal, and we thought, there was a conference in Berkeley that I helped put on with Michael Lerner called Conference on Spiritual Activism, and what really is missing is an understanding of the person, the individual. What kind of power comes from the individual person? So person power has become kind of a meme at the Metta Center. We've set up a website for it. We have a program on yoga, which is called Person Power Yoga, and we're setting up a press called Person Power Press. And let me read you a description of what we think person power is and why it's important. So person power is a corrective for the prevailing worldview. The prevailing worldview keeps all our attention focused outwards, looking for things as a source of happiness and the conquest of others as the source of security. So responding to this fundamental delusion, Martin Luther King said, we must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented civilization to a person-oriented civilization. And one of our mottos in that regard is, and this is particularly appropriate now since we're in an election season, that the issue is not to put a different kind of people in power, but to evoke a different kind of power in people. And that's what person power means to us, that we as individuals have incredible untapped resources. Our culture is not going to encourage us to tap into them, and we have to develop them ourselves and learn how to feed them into the wider world through those three phases that Caroline was mentioning. The personal empowerment leading to constructive program, which is where transition town folks make their best contribution, and then to active resistant satyagraha. So when we study, I'm moving now into our second point, what is the general theory of nonviolence. When we study Gandhi's career and his great campaigns, I think we see that something that he started very, very early, in fact, 1894, the first year of his activity in South Africa, he started working within the community as well as between his community and the power structure, which was the various South African colonial governments at that time. And he began to develop what later was called the constructive program. And I'm going to say more about it later, but I want to say now is that transition towns are what we regard here as potential constructive program. That is, they're terrific constructive activities in themselves. They are the nucleus of the great turning of the future that we have to move into. They are models for the new economy, for the new food system, and above all, for new decentralized communities. And all of those things are absolutely essential ingredients of the great turning. But in order for them to play their complete role, they have to be coordinated, shall we say, downward into the heart of the individual and outward into the society at large. That is, they have to be part of a regular strategy which involves empowered people as individuals and also involves not constructive program, but what we call here obstructive program. And I'm going to give you some examples of how that all fits in, and that is sort of the main point, and that's why we are so enthusiastic about talking to you. So if you have the presentation, if you would move on now to the second slide, we're going to talk about one of the models which is sort of basic to understanding how nonviolence operates. And I hope you have this as a slideshow so you can see the animation. But the first thing you should see is a graph labeled conflict escalation, and the amount of violence is on the vertical axis. Is that the ordinate or the abscissa? It's been a long time since I took algebra. And on the horizontal axis you have dehumanization, because what we're going to measure here is that as conflicts proceed, as they degenerate, as they get worse, as they escalate, the key thing that's happening, the most important driver of how that conflict is going to turn out is, are you able to hold on to your awareness that your opponent, the other party, your adversary, is a human being? And as things go on, that often degrades, the dehumanization increases, and the violence increases. And the curve would look something like this, if you're seeing the animation. It's just a saddle curve, because we all know that conflicts can burble along, and then suddenly they shoot up. So one of the most important things we need to know as social activists who are engaged in some kind of conflict, and Lord knows we will always be engaged in some kind of conflict, our vision for the ideal world here at Metta is not a world free of conflict, but a world in which there's much less conflict, because people are aware of their inner resources. They don't have to compete with one another. They don't have to exploit the planet. So there's much less conflict. But where conflict does occur, they are able to deal with it in a creative way. They have robust resources for doing that, and we're going to be talking about one of them toward the end. So one of the most important things we need to know, whether we're talking about within our community or between the community and the wider world, or between the community and an issue that we've taken on. For example, some of you are aware of this years-long conflict that went on at the University of California, where I used to teach, about a tract of land that they owned, and local students and ex-students wanted to turn it into a farm to give fresh organic food to especially poor members of the surrounding community. But for the university, private property is sacred, and they wanted to develop it, and it became a very bitter, divisive conflict. So if it's that kind of conflict, or you point out a particular issue, or Some other types. The first thing we need to know is where are we in that conflict? And if you would go to the next slide, what we want to do, you have these orange arrows moving down the curve. You want to de-escalate it so that it can be resolved in a creative way. And we do hold the belief, which Gandhi also held, that there is no intractable conflict in the world. For example, one of the great peace researchers of our time, Johan Galtung, who did a webinar with us recently, did a very thorough study of the conflict between the Western world and the Middle East, the Muslim world. And he did many, many interviews. And he discovered that the basic want that we have, the basic need we think we have in the West, is access to their oil resources. The basic need that they have is respect for their religion. So you can see from this that here is this incredibly divisive, destructive conflict that's tearing the world apart. Nobody can live in peace and security. There could be an attack coming from anywhere at any time, and it is all unnecessary. And if we could back the conflict down to the point where the dehumanization was minimal or absent and could talk to one another, if we could develop the maturity to give them some respect for their religion and just enter into a trade agreement about the oil reserves, think of the incredible human carnage and waste that we'd be able to save. Okay, so that's the goal, and that's pretty clear. But here's where we start to get technical. In the next slide, you see that it's convenient to divide this curve into three areas. In the first area, over on the left, where the dehumanization is very little, what you can do is negotiate. And that's how you always start. For Gandhi and King and others, it was important always to present your case to the opponent with the understanding that the opponent might respond. If he or she does, fine, the conflict is resolved. If not, you've at least played your part correctly in giving them the opportunity, in presenting them the idea that they might have negotiated. Okay? But as we all know, sometimes the dehumanization gets worse and they don't. And my classic example of this, crossing now from negotiate to resist, is the tremendous popular outpouring against the impending Iraq War in 2003, one of the largest worldwide public demonstrations ever. Something like 12 million people around the world demonstrated their desire that that war not take place. Many of them knew that the war was based on a lie, and it was going to be horrendously destructive, as we see that it has been. And the President of the United States, four-letter name, said, I don't have to pay attention to them, they're a focus group. So he went ahead with it anyway. In other words, the negotiation part, the presenting of petitions, didn't work. We did it. If we had been prepared to move to the next level, we could have kept that nonviolent campaign going, and we might well have put an end to that war before or shortly after that it began. But we needed to, what we did not have prepared, and we didn't really quite understand, was that you go to beyond a point where negotiation has any immediate effectiveness, and you've got to be able to offer nonviolent resistance in the myriad of ways that that is done. Blocking arms shipments, and you don't necessarily stop educating the public, you don't stop negotiating, but you put your body on the line. And this is tremendously powerful. We have evidence now that, I'm sure some of you are aware of this book, Why Civil Resistance Works, by Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan. We have evidence that nonviolent uprisings are twice as effective as violent uprisings. They usually take like 1/3 the time. The cost in life and treasure is drastically less. And interestingly enough, this is a point which nonviolence theory has a very good explanation for, and we'll get to it in a bit. Even when they fail, that is, when they fail to depose the dictatorship or whatever, the culture involved, the society involved, goes to greater democratic freedoms than violent ones do, even then when they, quote, succeed. I'll be saying more about that in just a bit. But it is not the case that nonviolence, even if you carry out your satyagraha or your truth-clinging nonviolent resistance very well, that there's any guarantee that it will succeed. There's much more guarantee than that violent uprisings will succeed, but there's no guarantee. So what do you do if you've tried negotiating, they weren't listening to you? Okay, you went out and did your sit-downs, whatever, and that still didn't work. Are you thwarted? Is there nothing else you can do? Well, it depends. If you care so deeply about this issue that you're not willing to accept defeat, that you're not willing to maybe even live in a world where this is going to continue, like slavery, human trafficking, torture, things like that, there is a final stage to this curve, which is you are prepared to risk your life. And there are many, many examples on record. My book, Search for a Nonviolent Future, has quite a few of them. There are many examples of people who have laid their life on the line, and that it has succeeded in the sense that it reached the opponent, it aroused them, and the issue was resolved. And there are cases also where that didn't happen and their life was lost, it was forfeited. So, but it is good to know that we have that ultimate recourse in nonviolence, and that has tremendous power. We don't want to be in a situation where we have to do something like that. So the idea is to get started earlier and use time-appropriate techniques. So don't go to a hunger strike when you haven't even sent the adversary a letter and you don't know whether they're going to listen to you or not. That would be, way too far to the right of the curve. And don't keep on sending in petitions when they've told you they're not listening to you. You've got to move on to active resistance. That would be the mistake of thinking you're too far to the left. So far this is a handy little curve. We have conflict resolution happening in the first third, and then satyagraha, or active nonviolent resistance, in the middle part, and then we may be called upon, if we care enough, to make the ultimate sacrifice. I mean, we have a friend who was in Afghanistan at a polling place. It was the first election in that country where women were allowed to vote, and somebody came in dressed as a woman, disguised as a woman. Our friend Amandine knew immediately it was a suicide bomber. She ran for her life and started hearing a voice in her head saying, go back, smile at him. And she said, are you kidding? But by golly, she mustered up the courage to go back in there, stand in front of this man, look him in the eye, and give him a nice broad smile. And guess what? He smiled back. After a while, turned around and walked out. So it's good to know that there is that tremendous power that we have. We hope to heck that we never have to use it. So I want to add one other element to the mix here, and that is constructive programming. If you're moving along with me in the slide presentations, you have this kind of blue bar going across all three to show that if you're working in a transition town, or if you're doing alternative economics somewhere, or if you're working on restorative justice in your community, there's no need to stop doing that at any point. Gandhi's belief was that if you did the constructive program well enough, you might never have to move to satyagraha. It could solve 90% of the issues by itself. So that's the complete picture. Conflict resolution, satyagraha, ultimate sacrifice as the conflict escalates, or as you find yourself in that stage of escalation. But constructive program can usually go on all the time. Now, all of this takes place, and I moved on to the next slide now, which shows an old guitar that a friend of mine had hanging on his backyard fence with this bumper sticker pinned into the guitar, which is a bit of a sacrilege in my view, but I like to show this bumper sticker because the greatest wisdom is often embedded in bumper stickers, and this to me sums up the essence of the new paradigm, the new story, in one short statement of 2 sentences. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. Even if you're living here in Marin County and you talk about, oh, I had a spiritual experience last week, and we were really not a human being having a spiritual experience. We are eternally spiritual beings having a human experience, projecting ourselves into the world of change as in human bodies, as human animals. And it is extremely helpful to remember this. It is the key to the new worldview to which we want to progress, and is also the key to developing ourselves as spiritual warriors. So, I hope I'm not moving too fast for you. As I say, you have the option of raising your hand if something needs clarification. Let me stop myself briefly at this point because otherwise I'll surely forget, and Stephanie will have to kick me under the table. And that is to talk about the 2 books that Caroline mentioned and what the difference between them is. The larger book, which has a complete theory of nonviolence, as I understood it some 15 years ago, but it hasn't essentially changed, is called The Search for a Nonviolent Future. It's published by New World Publishers, and of course, we also have copies here at the Metta Center. You can order it online from us. And every weekend, Saturday and Sunday, I read a few pages, or I talk about a few pages in that book, and that's up on our website as the Weekend Daily Mettas. During the week, you can subscribe to both. During the week, Daily Mettas are a quote from Gandhi analyzed by either Stephanie or myself, and on the weekend I go into a portion of that book and I say, since then we have so much more evidence, or what have you. The other book, the Nonviolence Handbook, was published by Barrett Kohler, and again we have copies. That's a shorter book, and it's simply, as it says, practical tips for carrying out a nonviolent campaign. And I'm happy to share with you that that book has been translated into Arabic. It's been translated into Chinese recently, and democratic opposition resistors in China, who are really up against a tough situation, they are using it. And I heard just recently that in this major uprising that took place in Baghdad at the beginning of May, which had a significant effect changing the government, that the leaders of that demonstration were reading this book in Arabic. All right. Well, that was a word from our sponsor, who also is our presenter in this case. And let's move on now to one other concept in nonviolence that I wanted to share with you. Both of them are developed in the 2 books and on our website. So this other concept we've come up with is called work versus work. Most people judge things superficially, and they say, for example, let's take Prague Spring. There's an uprising in the spring of 1968 going into 1969 in Czechoslovakia, an attempt to liberalize, not to get rid of, but just liberalize communism in Czechoslovakia. It did not work. They were tricked, and you could see that red kind of roadblock there. And if you look at it that way and you just judge it by externals, then all you say is it's a binary thing. It either worked or it didn't work. And in this case, it didn't work, and you go to the conclusion that nonviolence is not very effective, and that's a tragedy. Because what you're ignoring, you go to the next slide now, is to see that in the invisible world, nonviolence is always doing some good work. It often isn't to where you can see it, but it's always happening. And that's why, as we say, and Gandhi said this, I'm quoting from him now, the very nature of satyagraha, soul force or active nonviolence, the very nature of satyagraha is such that the fruit of the movement is contained in the movement itself. In other words, if you acted nonviolently and you kept your nonviolent discipline, you already had a tremendous impact on the surrounding social field, even if it doesn't show up in a successful outcome. Gandhi goes on, I hold to the faith that all activity pursued with a pure heart is bound to bear fruit, whether or not such fruit is visible to us. And sure enough, a lot of people have pointed out that the Prague Spring Uprising, which didn't, quote, work, unquote, it set the Czechs up so that they had a very smooth, very safe and peaceful transition of the type that Stephanie was talking about earlier. When the Berlin Wall fell and communism collapsed, some countries like Romania had a very, very tough time. Czechoslovakia had a very good time. So we must always be aware that we're always doing good work when we're doing nonviolence, and that good work is going to show up down the line. And that's why nonviolent uprisings lead to greater democracy, even when they, quote, don't work, when they seem to fail. Okay, well, I wish I could say much, much more about this, but I think we had better move on and put it together in this nice slide that Stephanie has prepared for us, where we represent a complete peace movement or nonviolent campaign as Picasso's dove, and that dove has to have two wings and a brain. Okay? One wing is constructive program. It's like what you people are doing in transition towns. The other wing is, of course, the active nonviolent resistance. And there must be a third component, the brainy one, where you have a strategic overview and you know when to do which. One of the great strengths of Gandhi's campaigns was that he had both of these things, and when it was not possible for some reason or another to do satyagraha, he could always fall back on constructive program and the movement did not lose its momentum. So, for example, in 1942, he called off satyagraha because he felt that he didn't want to embarrass the British when they were involved in a world war. For him, nonviolent campaigns were like a conversation, and if you're talking to someone and they're distracted, the conversation is going to be very frustrating. You won't get anywhere. So he needed to suspend satyagraha, but he did not suspend constructive program. And when someone came to him and said, what is it going to take now to get the British out of here? He said, phenomenal progress in spinning. So this is why I said earlier in the presentation that constructive program is only one wing, and when you're doing transition towns, you're doing very valuable work. But to really multiply the value, to realize its full effectiveness, its full potential, you want to be training also for satyagraha. And at times you may well need to use it. This is what happened with the Occupy the Farm. Now, actually, when we do constructive programs like this, there are two types. One of them was represented by Gandhi's spinning campaign, which is why we have so many spinning wheels and looms here at the Metta office. And that campaign was non-confrontational, which all constructive program is supposed to be, but it was completely unprovocative. The British did not understand fully that by doing the hand spinning, they were decentralizing India, therefore making it impossible for the British to control it, and even more importantly, they were taking back the capacity to make their own cloth which meant that they were not dependent on the British monopoly, which really broke the back of the colonial regime. But the British didn't realize that. The other campaign of constructive program was when they decided to make their own salt in 1930, and that was right in their face. That was confrontational and provocative because it was illegal for them to do so. So if for some constructive activity to actually be part of what he called constructive program, with the British spelling, it has to be in coordination with that satyagraha component. There are many good programs which you could carry out to completion which would not aim at a complete takedown of the obnoxious system. So I leave that with you as a kind of challenge and a kind of thought as to how transition towns or whatever these wonderful activities you're involved in, how they are part of a whole revolution. So here we move on to the third piece, which is our roadmap. And here's the roadmap scheme, the next slide, the big pretty mandala, if you're following us on the slideshow. Incidentally, Carolyn said, given time of day that you're watching this, some of you may actually be listening to this presentation in your car. And I half jocularly said to her, please tell them to pull over. I know this is going to be so fascinating that I don't want people to get into an accident. But this is a scheme that we worked out in an institution that we have here at the Metta Center. We're now meeting once a month, called Hope Tank. It's like a think tank, but it's more hopeful. And what we do is we have half an hour of meditation, 8:30 in the morning, first Saturday of the month. If you're local, please get in touch with us. And then after meditation, we have a potluck breakfast with some very good homemade chai. And then we have an in-depth conversation. And one of the things that those conversations developed was this very compelling image that seems to have gripped attention around the world. And see, what we've done is divided the problems that we're facing as you go around the circle into 6 areas where transition towns come into democracy and social justice, but we could also have put them, they're in vibrant and need-based economies. We could have put them elsewhere. It doesn't really matter. Some of them obviously fall into one sector, some not. But with these 6 sectors, we feel that everything is represented or has a home, so that whatever we're doing, we're part of this image. And what we have distinctly added is, if you look at the very top, we're giving a whole sector to what we call new story creation. So taking the wisdom from that bumper sticker and elaborating from that an entire new paradigm, a new model of human meaning and human potential. And we were absolutely thrilled this week when a New York Times columnist, David Brooks, wrote a column called How About the Real Culture Wars, or something like that, in which he talked about the new story. He didn't quote us or anybody else working on this, but by golly, he laid it out right there in the New York Times. We were startled and thrilled. And I'll talk a little bit about that story at the very end, but we do have a 2-page version of it on our website in the roadmap section. I'm also writing a book on the new story and how nonviolence fits into it. So that's going around the circle, and that's the prominent place of new story creation, which we regard really as kind of a key to facilitate all the other changes. And if you move from the center outward is where you find those 3 phases that Caroline talked about in her very kind introduction. And we don't mean that this should be taken literally in diachronic time, that is, not necessarily that you're going to do person power until you're illumined, and then you're going to take up a constructive program, and then if there's still any conflicts in the world, you will resolve them nonviolently. But they do have a kind of priority, and the formulation that we hit upon in our person power yoga retreat that we held a couple of months ago the Mount Madonna Center was that if you are incompletely working on person power, it will be a limiting factor to how effective your constructive program will be. And if you are being shabby with constructive program, or you don't have even that component, it will be a limiting factor in the efficacy of your nonviolent resistance. And unfortunately, this is exactly what we're seeing all over the world today. I mean, look at Arab Spring. They're doing things backward. You see, they're starting with the outer circle, nonviolent resistance first, and they have all these, in some cases, successful uprisings and turn people out of power, and then what? Then they collapse into the same old, same old. Whereas if they had had person power and developing the new story, if they had built up within constructive program the elements of a decentralized economy and a safe food system, and especially some alternative governance, that would have been ready to move into place when the regime fell. And Gandhi even said, if you are thinking that you're going to get your freedom and then rebuild India, you are dreaming. You rebuild India first, and then the colonial regime will be very weak. Its hold on us, the dependencies will be very weak. So that's the kind of priority that these three circles have. And let me now, if you were following this as a slideshow, there's going to be a very dramatic animation now. Hold on, here we go. Zoom. So we're going to zoom into person power for a moment, because that is, after all, the topic we're supposed to be talking about. And over the years, we've developed 5 steps that anybody can undertake, whether they're being an activist or not, and that helps us develop our nonviolent capacities. The first, which is now just a little bit weaker because of David Brooks' article, just kidding. The first is to avoid the mass media. This is where the old story of materialism, separateness, competition, conflict, violence is being put into our minds every single day, mainly through commercials, but also through, quote, entertainment and, quote, news sources. People often panic when we say avoid the mass media. They think, how am I going to know what's going on? And we say, do you think the mass media is telling you what's going on? No. You can find out more by visiting your local transition town or coming to the Metta Center. But we don't mean that you should never look at a newspaper or, blindfold yourself every time you go past a billboard. But don't let yourself be pulled into the lurid violence and sexualized violence of the mass media. To the extent that you have to be exposed to it, do so with detachment and keep your discrimination intact. Now, when you do that, of course, you're going to cut out an entire culture, so you'll have this big vacuum in your mind. How to fill that vacuum with something much more positive? We recommend that you learn everything that you can about nonviolence. What we try to communicate with the second part of our presentation today is that nonviolence is not just, oh, I'm going to be a nice guy, or gal. It's a science that Gandhi developed systematically over 50 years, and which has actually been further developed since his time. For the first time now, we have political scientists who are actually studying it. It's a brave new world going on out there. Learn everything you can about it. It's a lifelong study, and needless to say, Caroline gave me permission to shamelessly advertise our stuff. So here I go again. Needless to say, MetaCenter.org is one of several really excellent hubs where you can get this very positive 21st century culture. Waging Nonviolence is another, Popular Resistance is another. We'll have some of these listed. One thing that's coming to our website soon is a science section which will outline all the incredible discoveries in science in the last 30, 40 years that support the possibility of nonviolence. Now, even if you stop watching mass media, even if you do not have a television set in your transition town, which I certainly hope is the case, We have nonetheless been exposed to the old story, to the competitive culture, and if we want to get that influence out of our minds and hearts completely, we strongly recommend that people take up a spiritual practice. It's a rather individual matter how you will go about this. The book that Stephanie read from is from an outfit called the Blue Mountain Center of Meditation. They have a wonderful website, which is soon going to be even more wonderful. And it is Easwaran.org, EASWARAN.org, and that has everything you need to learn the basics of what is called passage meditation, which Stephanie and I are both doing, and others here at Metta, and we find it is, among others, it is a very powerful technique. We won't say more about that right now, but if you're doing all those three things, you're changing yourself. And we've had people who came to our meditation center, and we asked them, what brings you here? And they will say things like, well, I'm in college, I have this roommate, and I can't believe what has happened to the jerk. He's such a nice guy. And it's all the result of spiritual practice and some discrimination about the culture that you take in and learning about the new one. So what we recommend then is that you're going to do two things as far as the outside world is concerned. One is to be more personal with people. One of the things that, as Martin Luther King said, this thing-oriented civilization has done to us is cut us off from one another. So we want to be more personal. And then get active. Get active, find where your capacities meet the needs of the world. And whatever you're doing, be prepared to tell the new story. Be prepared to tell people we're doing this because we are spiritual beings. We're all deeply interconnected. We are fulfilled by service and relationships of trust, not by consumption. What's that? Our prosperity depends on that of everyone. The 1%, 99% is absolutely unworkable, as well as being morally obscene. No, don't say that part. And finally, that we are not there yet. We are far from realizing our potential. So let me leave you with a little bit of a challenge. See if Stephanie wants to add anything, and then open it up for questions. So the challenge is this. One of the things that we've come up with in Hope Tank Conversations is a plausible trajectory by which we might advance from a very doable, winnable success that embodies elements of the new story stepwise to a complete takedown of the war system and the creation of stable peace. And that is this. We start with enhancing, building, finishing the project of creating restorative justice systems in the nation's schools. This is doable. It's non-confrontational. The success rate has been absolutely fantastic wherever it's been tried. Nobody wants their kids to be treated as criminals, to be punished. And if we did it right, if we get it, almost throughout the entire school systems of the U.S. and explain why it's working, that we are spiritual beings, so on and so forth, we could then move from there to do something which at the moment is unachievable, which is to convert the entire criminal justice system, one of the biggest disgraces and failures of our present culture here in the U.S., convert the whole criminal justice system to restorative practices. From there, we could take the next big giant step and get rid of war. So that's a kind of trajectory into the projected into the future, starting from something that's almost done in our present world. And as a challenge, you might think about how would we get there from alternative economies? How would we get to the completely revised world from transition towns, from safe food systems, and so forth? Stephanie, would you like to add, subtract, multiply, divide?
Thank you, Michael. Well, this has been a very interesting overview of the roadmap and person power. And all that I would add, because you and I have worked on this for a long time, so we understand, sometimes we have an understanding that we forget to say things, but one of them is that with person power and the need for developing the spiritual practice and repersonalization and really telling the story, is that it's not just, we're not setting up, this is something that we have to work with all the time with everybody, even those who we consider, our closest allies, because depersonalization, humiliation, these can creep in all of the time, whether it be in our political field or in our personal life, where the use of humiliation, which is essentially dehumanizing others, no matter who they are, is seen as a tool, as the butt of a joke, but it's mean-spirited. And as I'm saying that, there's a beautiful fox walking right in front of my window, a baby. So let's be aware of the dehumanization that comes through humiliation, making people whom we disagree with or whom we'd like to, teach something to, as that being our tool. Let's move away from that, and then that really helps to contextualize. Well, a spiritual practice would help us do that because it starts to get into our consciousness at a deeper level, and these are small tools. So thank you. Now I'm going to look at the fox.
Yeah, I wish we were doing this visually, Caroline. We can move the computer over to the window. There's a very, very pretty gray fox outside. Well, we would be very happy to entertain questions, comments from any of you at this point.
Great. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Stephanie. So for those of you on the call, if you have a question or comment, please press 1 on your keypad, and I will call on you. So dive in. Not seeing any yet. Someone's got to break the ice. There we go. Thank you. Let's see. Carl, please go ahead.
Hey there. Thanks for taking my call. I would like to hear how any of you would distinguish alternative media from mass media.
Sure. Well, one classic example of alternative media is Peace Paradigm Radio, which we put on at a little community radio station down here in Point Reyes Station. And we have a good friend, two good friends, Rivera's son and Cheryl Miller, who do a similar program out of New Mexico. So one feature of it is that it's decentralized. Another feature of it is that it tends to respond to local needs. But from my point of view, the most important feature would be that the assumptions behind it would be news story assumptions. And that, see, for example, one of the things that we do on Peace Paradigm Radio is we talk about nonviolent campaigns and episodes which virtually never work their way into the mainstream. And if they do, they are usually misinterpreted. For example, journalists, and we are working on this in other ways, but journalists don't know about work versus work. So if they see something that doesn't produce the immediate success that they wanted to produce, they say, see, that shows you nonviolence failed. Or they just constantly reiterate the old story in millions of ways, like they will just come on and say, warfare has been with us forever. Obama said this, President Obama said this, even did his Nobel Prize speech, and it's completely false. They're absolutely unaware of what anthropology and forensic anthropology has discovered about pre-human history, that only like somewhere between 1% and 4% of hunter-gatherer remains that have been uncovered going back 30,000 years actually showed any signs of violent conflict. So that's just one example. They would be coming from the news story, it would tend to be decentralized because that's the only way we can do it these days. I would be thrilled if CNN started to tell the news story. But the point of a nonviolent actor is you're not going to wait for that. You're not going to be dependent on them. You're going to go to your local media, your own social media, your blogs, and so forth, and do it from there. So thank you, Carl. That was a good question.
Thank you,
Great.
and I really...
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I really appreciate the presentation, and would love to hear if Stephanie or Caroline had anything to add.
Stephanie?
I would just say nice to meet you, and that to be aware that even when we go to our social media and our alternative medias, that there is still elements of the old story, and in there is still the use of humiliation, removing the dignity of those who disagree with our politics, and the people, and then the people who support those people, and that doesn't add to bringing us closer together. So we have to also kind of use this as Gandhi said, satyagraha means holding firmly to truth. And that truth is that every human being has dignity, and that we're not going to be the ones to degrade that dignity. We're going to uplift it. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's go to Jamie Edmonds, and then we'll hear from Eleanor. So go ahead, Jamie.
Thanks, Caroline. Just wanted to ask if how Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication tied into this at all. I was kind of expecting to hear something about that with the nonviolent tag, and also to let you know that Charles Eisenstein's New and Ancient Story, the space between stories that we're living in now as we're writing this new story, just is being redone, and that's been a huge resource for me. So a question and a comment.
Great. Thank you very much, Jamie. Yeah, we are frequently confused, in fact, with nonviolent communication. I think one way of looking at the difference is they are mainly operating in that first third of the escalation curve. And they're outside of the creative conflict reduction work that they do, which is very valuable work. They are not doing constructive program in other sectors of society. They're not working on the new economy, so on and so forth. Though people who do nonviolent communication often branch out and do things like that. One of our best friends, Mickey Kashtan, is the one who set up NVC here in the Bay Area, and she's developed whole new systems of negotiation procedures and so forth. She's offering a course with us right now. So they're, as far as conflict itself is concerned, they're the first part of the curve. But I want to add that the 5 points that we put so centrally in our Person Power Circle, the first time I ever brought that out in public was at a meeting with Marshall Rosenberg. And he said, I'll never forget, he said, I am psyched. And so to this day, his enthusiasm and support was very helpful to me. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Thank you. I wanted to add that what we understand nonviolence to be is a conversation, but it goes beyond our words, and nonviolence in the larger picture is nonviolence in mind, body, and spirit, the whole person. So if we can use that as an analogy to translate some of the concepts of nonviolent communication, then you see that it fits in beautifully along all parts of it. But if we're talking about it just as this tool of, I hear what you're saying, let me add something, that toolbox as well from the Rosenberg perspective, which is very useful, then again I want to reinforce that we can understand that within the context of kind of conflict de-escalation in the first part of the conflict escalation curve. And then I also want just to comment that I respect the work of Charles Eisenstein, and to just say yes, and let's also be able to articulate how nonviolence works into what he's saying as well, because I haven't found a very clear picture or articulation of the actual dynamics of nonviolence. And this is really why we're trying to do this work within the framework of the new story, is because that piece seems to be missing, glazed over, and misunderstood, and it's really the key to the new story. So just want to add that as you're reading and participating in the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, know that that world has to come through a very keen understanding of human dignity, of collaborative work as well, and nonviolence. Thank you.
Great. I would just add to that a little personal note that I was giving a talk at Fellowship of Reconciliation anniversary meeting a few years ago, and it dawned on me that nonviolence really is doubly critical to the new story. It's cognitively a part, in the new story, how do you resolve conflict? That's through nonviolence. So it's a cognitive part of the picture. But it also is the technique which is going to actually make the real transition happen. So you try to change society through violent means, it'll just end up, as I said before, back in the same old. So.
I'm not saying violent means that it's not the picture.
Right. So, but my point is that nonviolence has to be part of the new story and has to be part of the new story creation. Thanks, Jamie. Those are also
very thank you.
Very welcome.
Very welcome.
Eleanor?
Yeah. Hi. I'm really appreciating everything you're saying, and I'm trying to get up to speed with it. I just want advice, actually. I'm feeling a lot like I'm in the do or die end of the spectrum up there, if I'm understanding what you were saying. And I'm wondering, how do we, live our life and in a world where most of our actions, that we take every day are inflicting violence on somebody or something, on humans, animals, or the environment. And, being in the situation we're in now, where we have to, we're looking at voting and voting for the lesser evil or something, where I'm feeling like I'm in the do or die, like I can't live in a world or take any more actions or participate in a way that's dehumanizing and life against life. And so anyway, I liked what you said about Gandhi and the spinning wheel, and I'm just wondering if you can give me any advice or...
Yeah. Perhaps I'll start and then Michael can jump in. One of the key ideas of nonviolence is that, well, let me back up. Well, the reason we have something called a hope tank is because as we're studying nonviolence, what we realize is that it's impossible to hold on to nonviolence and to be hopeless at the same time. Because the more that we understand that picture, the more it unfolds our agency, and as our agency unfolds, it's impossible to feel that we're not contributing to a bigger change. So it's a wonderful picture, and that's going back to those points in the person power circle. Look at those systematically, and then find that the involvement might look different. It might change, but so I would recommend going back to the person power circle and kind of going through those systematically. The other thing I want to say about nonviolence is that Gandhi said as well, it's an ideal, and especially ahimsa, the idea of not only not harming any living being ever, because even as we boil our water, we're harming beings, but there's a lot of tricky gray areas as well. And it's going to look different for a lot of people. So the first thing is to prioritize our relationships and know that even if somebody is taking it in a different way or not doing it exactly our way, that we can still get along and work things out, and there needs to be no alienation between ourselves and other people, ourselves and the rest of life. But that it's being in a body, we can escape from doing some harm, and the goal is to try to minimize the harm as much as we can, so including harm to ourselves in that process. So it's an art. It's a way of living, and it's an art. And the other part is that nonviolence requires strategic thinking and strategic logic as much as it requires, a big vision. And with a political system and political candidates, we can look at it in a way of a long-term strategy of what can we do that will minimize harm in this situation, but not to put all of our eggs in the basket that a political leader is going to make the world a nonviolent place either. But that if we could have somebody in political office, on the one hand, that we feel like will do the least amount of harm on the one hand, and then on the other, not to stop a movement just because someone's elected, but to keep it moving. So there's, it's a long-term strategy, and it's maybe also helping people to understand the nature of power too, that just because if we don't get what we want, it doesn't mean that we no longer have power, or that it's time to despair or to give up. But rather, if we don't get what we want, then it's time to try a new way or to go about it in a different way. And B.R. Nanda, a well-known biographer of Gandhi, said nonviolence is the kind of thing where you can lose all the battles and you can still go on to win the war. So, Michael.
Very good. I just want to emphasize something that you already said, Stephanie, that Gandhi found that as long as you're in the body, you're going to be creating a certain amount of himsa, a certain amount of damage. So what we should feel called upon to do as people, human beings, is to minimize that damage and maximize the nonviolence. That's the best that we can do. And even by having the attitude that you have, Eleanor, you are helping the world. You're creating a certain amount of nonviolence in the world. And and I also think that sometimes when people hear the term nonviolence, they think of it in a very dualistic way, as a moral category, that is like a good versus evil. And it's not that. It's more like a science. It's more like a force. Gandhi said it's like any force of nature. It has degrees, and he felt that he was still learning about nonviolence toward the very end of his life. So I don't think we can afford to feel differently. But be of good cheer, and don't put too many hopes on the election. Always remember that when Martin Luther King came to LBJ and said, "We need a Human Voting Rights Act," LBJ said, "That's a great idea. Now go out and make me do it." So that's our part of the action. We go out and make them do it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Great. I want to also thank you, Michael and Stephanie. We're at our closing time here, and just want to give you each an opportunity for some closing comments. So starting with you, Michael, and then we'll hear from Stephanie.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'll try and keep this brief. I just want to say that it has been an incredible thrill for me to discover nonviolence, and sharing it with others is the greatest fulfillment of my life. And I would just encourage everyone to maybe have a peek at our website, metacenter.org. Let us know if there's something there that you don't see. There's something that you think should be changed. We're always working on it, and we would love to hear from you. Stephanie?
Right.
I feel called, first of all, to thank everybody on this call, especially because I felt like without this call, I would not have seen that beautiful gray fox walk in front of my window. And I'm thinking about something that Gandhi said, which is that we are constantly being amazed at the discoveries in the field of violence, but I say that there are even more discoveries and more astounding discoveries still to be made in the field of nonviolence. And so it's wonderful to be on this journey with all of you, and look forward to being in touch with anybody who has more questions, and let's keep the conversation going. Let's let this be a starting place, not an end point. Thank you.
Wonderful. Again, thank you both, Stephanie and Michael, for joining us today. And we will post a recording of this probably in about 10 days' time, so you can enjoy it again. So without further ado, I'll release all of you into this magnificent day, and just with a lot of gratitude.